Welcome back to Be Real Talks. I'm Sophia Givry. Today we are welcoming Monica Majors. She holds a master's in sociology from the University of New Orleans with several years experience working in grant-funded and nonprofit organizations. Currently, she is a doctoral candidate researching learning and leadership development for gender and ethnic minorities within academia and industry entrepreneurs. At Binghamton University, Monica is the Assistant Dean of Academic Diversity and Inclusive Excellence for the Watson School of Engineering and Applied Science. She also serves as a consultant for a New Orleans-based business incubator, Propeller. As a firm believer in the power of mentoring, Monica brings life to her role by encouraging students who may be the first in their family to go to college or the only woman in the room to stick with the STEM fields. Today, we're going to be talking about what it is like to be a woman working in male-dominated industries. Thank you so much for joining us, Monica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sophia. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So right off the bat here, can you talk to us about how your personal experience or any aspect of your identity really influenced your role as Assistant Dean of Academic Diversity and Inclusive Excellence?
Sure. So first thing first, as you can see, I'm Black and a woman. So I think that those identities very much influence how I have experienced the world and allows me to connect with other students who may not be male or, who may not be part of the dominant culture. So kind of know that experience just from the body that I live in. But in addition to that, I graduated from my undergrads from an HBCU, a historically Black college or university, Xavier University of Louisiana. And brag moment, we are number one at placing African Americans in medical school. And so I was in a very interesting situation as I was an undergrad in that I was going to school with people who were statistically not the norm. They were going on to get not just advanced degrees, but one of the most prestigious professional degrees, right? And so in the HBCU, it's the only Catholic HBCU, but what we're taught is to embrace our identity, but also move forward and use our experience to help others. And so that's kind of that mission of social justice maybe went a little bit deeper than I had planned when I got there because I too wanted to be a physician at one point in time. And yeah, I think that now that I'm moving to the assistant dean position, I'm using that training and those experiences to move my work forward. And it informs what I do very much so.
Yeah, and like you were kind of saying with the experience you had, even just the representation of students being able to see an assistant dean that looks like them, that they can relate to is so important. So have you faced any challenges when implementing a DEI program?
The quick shoot from the hip answer to that is yes. But let me qualify that as well. I think, well, I know, right, from my training, but also from my experience, everyone is resistant to change, right? And not maybe every change, but change. And so I have received resistance here and other places for a myriad of reasons. And I had to learn to know what those reasons may be to make the work a little bit easier, because in DEI work, either like informally or like because it is your call and duty of your role, you're going to find that people are going to ask why. So in a different professional experience, I had someone say, I don't really believe you should have a job. Everyone's the same. And so you have that where like your worldview does not align with supporting diversity. So what do we do then, right? And I think that is another reason we have an issue. People are not educated, right? And I see my role very much as an educator, one, because I sit into an institution of higher education, but additionally because people do not know what the word diversity means. Sometimes I walk in the room and they're like, oh, affirmative action women and Black and brown people. And I was like, no, you're missing so many groups. Like everyone is a protected class in some type of way. And so what does diversity mean, especially within engineering, right? Like what does diversity mean? I think a lot of times we've leaned on diversity of thought and innovation. And sometimes that sits as a guise to not deal with the other identities that people may deal with. Other reasons I have had some issues is resource allocation, right? And that's multiple levels. So sometimes all people think diversity is counting. Oh, great. We have two women, and I think one of them is a part of the LGBTQ community. Oh, and we have that Hispanic woman, and we have a man who is not heterosexual and Christian. Like, basically, that's what we do a lot of times. And I'm not saying that the numbers don't mean anything, but if all you're looking for is numbers, you're not going to allocate your resources towards supporting diversity in the same way as if you see it as diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? Those are, although they overlap, those are three very different things. I think the other challenges I have had is identifying who's your ally and who's not, right? Just because someone looks like the population that you're looking to support does not mean that they are an ally, right? And on the flip side, doesn't mean that they aren't, right? And so to kind of put that on the other side, telling people what allyship means, right, when implementing, right, like, this is how you can help, right, has been very important. So I know the resistance comes with reasons. And sometimes it's the culture of the academy, right? Like, this diversity thing has become something extra or something I need to get a grant. And other people have said, oh, no, it really is important, or learned it from that. But I think, yeah, we all hit, a few obstacles when we're trying to do something new. Change is not always fun for everyone.
Yeah, I think you really highlight well that kind of tiered attack on people who are outside of this kind of work. First, it's that ideological barrier to get past, right? Of, I see a couple people who don't look like the larger population at an institution. This must be diversity, right? And kind of going beyond those kinds of notions to really have that impact and value, and then how even that kind of ideology really influences the resources that are devoted to it.
Most definitely.
And I'm sure that you're great at problem solving with limited resources, because that is something that I've kind of learned in initiatives that I've been a part of, right? Is the money isn't always there.
Right. And I have to say, I've pulled on some allies and some accomplices many a times, right? Like, what if you have an initiative that can get funding but doesn't have money to hire staff? Because if you hire staff, if you don't know, hiring staff is very expensive. It usually is like 150% the cost of how much it is to hire them. And so how do you take that initiative and put as much money in the student's hand or towards what, the objective is? And so, yeah, you become very, very creative, but it also helps you understand where there are resources. I think that Watson, the school where I am, has done a great job of both giving resources and helping us leverage the resources that are from our donors or our alumni. I mean, I just came from a development meeting before this. And again, we're nowhere near where we want to be, but having conversations and wanting people wanting to help you, right, to get those resources is great. But yeah, there's never enough. Yeah.
And can you kind of talk about your experience working in male-dominated fields?
Most certainly. What's funny is, by training, I'm a social scientist and a mixed methodologist, right? And so the quantitative and the qualitative is great. I love to hear stories. And so moving into the engineering world makes you very metrics-based and think and talk differently. And I've always had friends who were engineers or someone in that field, but that doesn't mean you're used to working with them. And what's funny is one of my friends shortly after college was one of the top women engineers in SWE. And so it was not an anomaly for me to see a woman in engineering, right? But what I found in working in engineering, there are many times I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the only woman of color. I'm the only person of color that's underrepresented in the room. And some of my research and mentoring also deals with imposter syndrome. And I'd like to take this moment. PSA, everyone deals with it, right? But especially when you're in a space that you don't see people who look like you, right? And so being in a male-dominated space has required me to also be introspective, right? Because I think that we vicariously, you're like told, like, you're in a male-dominated space, these things are going to happen to you. And they may happen to you, but that doesn't mean they will happen to you. But outside of that, I recognize who I am and where I am probably 90% of the time, right? But I think I am also very privileged to be able to be there and advocate for diverse populations. A lot of times women don't get to speak for themselves. I was privileged enough to be supported in doing a focus group of women in Watson to hear their thoughts and their experiences. And many of them were positive, but some of them were just like, can people stop mansplaining things to me? Right? Like, where, I'm in this space, and I don't think that that's unique to engineering, but it's crazy to have to still say, like, her brain, right, can comprehend the same way. Like, so yeah, being in a male-dominated space is salient the majority of the time that you're in that space. But you find allies and you find ways to cope.
Yeah, that connection with others. We were kind of going through the same struggle essentially. And you did mention mansplaining. So have you ever been in situations where you said something really thoughtful or, something important and it was ignored, and then a couple minutes later a man says it and it's kind of praised? And how did you handle that situation?
Sophia, that drives me crazy. So I'm one person, give credit where credit is due, citations or otherwise. And it's been great to have some really good colleagues that will do that. But I remember early in my career and some other times that you say something and you begin to question yourself, like, well, maybe I wasn't clear. Like, the first thing you do is that imposter syndrome, or maybe I didn't say it correctly, or maybe I didn't make the link, and I remember feeling like that. And again, it was my tribe. Like, I came to one of my colleagues and friends and was like, hey, this is happening. Am I like being overly sensitive? What does this sound like to you? And so that's what I advise students to do as well, or people. It's like, just check with someone sometimes, because most of the time what you're experiencing is true. Like, I'm never going to say that your experience is not valid. But other things that I've done, and I don't know if they might be maladaptive, I don't know, we'll see, is I've learned to be quiet more frequently, so that when I do speak, it is more novel. You're more likely to listen to me, right? And then also, I work in engineering. And so in the social sciences, we like the story and, and a lot of times it's like bullet, 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 bullet outcome, right? And so I've had to change the way I communicate because in the introspection, I realized, maybe I'm being too much of a storyteller. So gauging your audience, right? And then in addition, sometimes I'll verbally take credit. Like, oh, I was just saying that same thing. In fact, right? And add something new to it. But that takes a lot of work. Like, you have to do because it's intimidating. It's scary. Like, even if the person doesn't have any power over you, you're telling someone, give me credit back. And I think as a woman, we're not used to doing that. We're very used to being, supportive and nurturing. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But if it's your idea and it's the right time, you should ask for your credit.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, right? Of course. And sometimes I'll be like, was I speaking English? Like you said, like, am I clear? What is going on? Did I articulate that right? It's a very confusing kind of situation when those moments happen. And like you said, it can be uncomfortable it's almost like you're saying it the second time, right? Like, okay, didn't I just kind of say that a little bit ago? Type of thing. And then I like how you draw out those distinctions in sort of persuasion styles from industry to industry. I don't think that's talked about enough, right? Is obviously we're making generalizations, but I have noticed that, right? With engineering, it's more technical. They do kind of have that speaking style and kind of gravitate more to that style of persuasion. And so what actions, besides kind of dealing with the mansplaining, what other actions have you found to be helpful when navigating male-dominated spaces?
Let's think. Let's talk, I guess, about on the social side, right? Because in the workspace, in the learning environment, you spend a lot of time there, right? And so whether your experience is what other people think you're experiencing or not, we're social creatures and we need to connect in some way. And so my tribe, right, who exists outside of the university, right, that they are very helpful in supporting. But internally, I have identified allies, mentors, and sponsors. So I have very much found that, hey, I have this idea, let me run it by you. But because this person is an ally or a sponsor, they're always willing to give me credit, right? So they get to use their voice for my idea, and then their credibility then falls on me, and then I get to move forward. It's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but like we learn to exist and move in the systems that we're in. Another area, another way that I do that I think is I learned to say no, right? Like, and I know that sounds, it's almost like claiming credit, right? So in male-dominated spaces, I think some things are asked of you, not with ill intent, but just kind of like, oh, there's this stereotype in your head, she'll do this, or, you know, we're in this male-dominated space. She would be better to advise this student because she's female and she's nurturing, and she, you know, all these assumptions are made. And sometimes I'll say no, like, honestly, I don't have the bandwidth for that right now, but I'd be willing to provide you with some resources to do that, or, you know, can I make some other suggestions? In addition, I like to ask for what I want, and I try and be very clear about that, right? And if you ask me what I want and I don't know, I have little problem telling you. Like, you know, I haven't really thought that all the way through, and I think being assertive is good, but I also deny that girl boss narrative, right? That like, I have to be just like a guy to be in this space because it's male dominated. And I'm not trying to like say like the girl boss is like a pejorative term or deconstructed, not my dissertation, not my like, but I think that owning what is considered a feminine attribute of being nurturing or quote unquote maternal is okay, but also being assertive is okay. And so owning who I am and denying it from fitting in a particular mode of being a girl boss does also help me, because then I'm like, I'm just trying to be authentic to who I am. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at, right? Or you learn really quickly when you try. And you're just like, maybe this isn't my lane. So being in the male-dominated space, I think, is one, I hate to say it this way, but to thine own self be true, right? Because then you're not so like, I'm a woman, they're a man. I'm a woman, they're a man, right? It's just like, no, this is who I am, regardless of my gender, sex identification in the moment. And I think the last thing that I would say that I do is I try and teach and work with other females within Watson and within my community, because helping them helps me. It's like building the tribe, right? Because there's more of us together. And so in the male-dominated space and teaching them and advocating for them, it almost makes you feel like you have a superpower. Like, no, I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it, you know, for some other people in this space. So those are kind of some tactics that I've taken. I've mentioned the others: mentorship, sponsorship, and being vocal about trying to identify allies, and sometimes asking people, not necessarily explicitly, right, but like, do you support women? You know, things like that.
Yeah, I think those are really concrete, great tips for students. And then kind of a question building on that, or based on what you just said, I've kind of find in my experience, when you're a woman and you act in a way that's normally associated with a man, like that assertive kind of style, sometimes it's really taken in a negative way, right? It's like, oh, there she goes, you know. So how have you managed that?
What's funny is it's a lot of education and correcting. And I have to say, for me, that my position has made it where the power dynamics make it sometimes easier for me to do that, right? The consequences are different. And so I understand if you're a student and you feel like you can't correct, like, I understand that, but let's try and work through it, right? And so sometimes, you know, basic quote unquote diversity training, what do you mean by that? Like if someone says something negative or stereotypical about another person in another group, no, that's not his pronoun. I know what I know, right? And so you go through that conversation. And I think when you do that, people also know that your brand and your boundaries are, don't do that. So is it said behind my back? Maybe, right? But I think one of the personal development coaches that I've heard it quoted, but forgive me if I don't quote it correctly. Basically, what people think about you is none of your business, right? Like, if I'm authentic and I'm doing my job. Other ways is I am selectively assertive, right? So you can win the battle and lose the war. And not to say that diversity, inclusion, and equity is a war. I'm not saying that, but it is a very big task. It is an elephant we're eating it one bite at a time. So is it necessary for me to do it right now? And if I do, is it getting me to my larger goal? And I think you should do that with anything though. Like it's not just diversity, but as a woman, is me asserting my womanhood, and I am not the stereotypical woman, and don't create a connection to my demeanor to like me not being feminine or being, a pejorative term, or, saying something like that. And so I think you can do a few things also. And I hate to say it this way, is you get to choose where you are a lot of the time. So sometimes you just have to change who you're around. There are certain people I do not like to entertain. I know you have shown me who you are. And so I have decided I won't, interact with you. This is mostly on the personal level, not necessarily professionally, but you'll see it on both sides.
Yeah, I love that balance of being your authentic self, but also kind of reading the room. And then just that self-care, right? If you know it's just not going to be a situation that is going to be healthy for you, it's like, okay, I've put the effort in kind of thing. So what about some students who they've taken engineering classes and they're kind of just getting a little bit tired of being in that male-dominated space? Do you have advice for them about, they're looking at their career now and they're worried about finding that sense of belonging or experiencing potential prejudice or discrimination?
Well, the first thing I would say is, honey, congratulations for being this far along and being an engineer, right? It's not easy. And you're not here just because you're a woman, and you're not going to get a job just because you're a woman. And, there are so many things that the assumptions and the myths about being a woman in engineering, right? So first, those things are not true, and congratulations, I tip my hat to you. Other things, I think a lot of times the isms that we experience sometimes are vicarious, right? Like we hear a story of a woman experiencing discrimination in a male-dominated space, and so we're ready for that to happen to us. I think that there's a thin line between being prepared for it to happen and expecting it and waiting for it to happen, right? Like that, it puts you in a different mental health space, right? To say like, I'm waiting for someone to say something, as opposed to this may happen. Other things is if you're entering the workforce, there are places that are good for women or good for underrepresented minorities or LGBTQ, like talk to those organizations. You will find out very quickly what they value and how they value it, right? Like say you are a woman who is not in a heterosexual relationship but you do want children. You should probably talk to the organization about, well, what kind of benefits do you have? And if they have benefits that align with what you need, then that tells you that they value your identity in that way, right? And so that translates to a myriad of things: maternity, paternity leave, all of these things. In addition, I've said this a million times and I'll continue to say it. You have to build your tribe. You have to have those who support you around you, and you have to find that community. So when you're on campus, students, building your community your first year is interesting because you're going to meet a lot of people and like them. You probably hang out with them. And then after the first semester, like half of them are gone or have changed. It's almost like, you're moving through friends. And that's very normal. But eventually you'll end up with a stable group, or that's the hope. And so I would advise you connect with organizations that are like what you want to do, either professionally, vocationally, or personally, right? So maybe you don't feel comfortable in the general body meetings for the organization A in engineering. However, you find that one of the groups that plays a particular game, right? A gamer group, you love it. And so if you find community there, it can help you and empower you in the other spaces. The other piece of advice I think I would give students is understand that this is a time and moment. Yes, as a woman, you will experience some discrimination, some prejudices. I'm not saying none of those are true, but it should not be that every moment of every day. Right. And so understanding that it can be difficult and tiring, right? If it's that difficult, you probably need to be somewhere else and move somewhere else. But there are organizations that do support women, right? And if it's not there, sometimes you can build it, right? So when I was in graduate school, I was in executive leadership for one organization for Black graduate students and professional students. But at the time, a lot of us were stressed. And so we were like, what can we do? We can exercise. One friend liked to run. I was not a runner, but I would do I'll do a 5 or 10K or something. And so we started a group. And what that did was it gave us solace. Like, it was not related to whatever we did, but we found community because one woman was in economics. There was another woman in English. There was another woman in education, some in psychology or neurology. And so there were a lot of people in fields that, quote unquote, they didn't belong in, right? If we look at statistically. So finding that community is critical.
Yeah, I think that's very well-rounded, and I know that students will gain a lot from that advice. So my last question is, what advice or tips do you have for students that are having trouble connecting with individuals that kind of on the surface don't seem like they share common interests?
I first would ask, why are you trying to connect? Right? Like, are you trying to build community? Are you looking for a study partner? Right? Like, there are different reasons for different relationships. And the another thing is, so when I came to Binghamton, if you're familiar with Watson, there are not a lot of, there are a lot of women in where I work, like in the space where I work, but overall in engineering, there aren't a lot of women. And I remember this one woman came to me and she just said, hey, how are you doing? Checked on me every now and again and was very open to me. And that built our professional friendship. So my question would be, are you open to the friendship, right? Like, are you open to the community? Are you putting yourself out there? Also, like I said before, there's student organizations, there's NSBE, there's SHEP, there's SWE, there's Women in Tech. There are a lot of organizations, and understand that you don't have to have that identity to be a part of that group, which is what's great about those groups. In addition, you are here for academic reasons. So maybe look to see if there's an academic program like LSAMP, or we're just starting the decoding project, which is specifically built to have cohorts who are women in STEM, particularly in Watson, and underrepresented minorities who want to build coding skills but might not be computer scientists. You will build friends that way. As I said before, I went to an HBCU. I was a McNair Scholar, and one of my close friends just got married last year, and everyone who was in her wedding, we all went to school together, and we were McNair Scholars together, and we built the friendship through going through that process together. And now we live all across the country. And so finding opportunities to meet organically is always helpful. If you were introverted, right? Maybe that means that you volunteer to work in a research lab. Like, you don't necessarily have to go into a social setting to find community. And also ask. I'm not saying you won't, quote unquote, be rejected some of the time, but if you see someone, an upperclassman, a graduate student, a TA, ask them, well, how can I connect with other students? How can I connect with faculty members? How can I do those things? Because creating that community is not a one time and go, right? And even if you had a great social life in high school, coming to university might be very different because we're all here for similar reasons, but we connect differently. And the campus is pretty big and social distance, so it should be even bigger.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I know I learned a lot about you, and I hope students feel the same way after this conversation.
Thank you so much, Sophia. As students, I hope that you enjoy your time listening. I would welcome you to reach out if you have more questions. Sophia, if I could leave with one statement, women in engineering, you should always negotiate your salary, any offer that you get, and be empowered to be where you are. You deserve to be where you are, and we're honored to have you. Thank you so much, Sophia. I appreciate this.
Thank you. And I really love that you mentioned that negotiation part, because I think that is something that often can be very uncomfortable and not talked about enough.
Well, yeah, if you go to the Career Center, they can help you. But if you talk to me, I'll tell you the same thing. So yes, so many tools on campus to support our women within engineering, Watson, and STEM overall.
Yep. And to all the students watching, I will see you on the next one.
Have a good day. Bye.